I think we can put these speed trains back in the shutter. So first of all I'm going to cock the shutter by pulling the main cam round to the cocked position with the tip of my screwdriver. That allows me to drop in my retard gear train. Now this tab on the gear train here needs to be pulled back. And you heard that click, that's as it dropped past this tab on the blade actuating ring, which activates the retard gear train. Let's pull that back. That's better. Put its screws in. Check that that moves freely, it does. And the screw at the other end, or actually it goes down in here rather than at the end, this one, the hole that goes through in the bottom of the retard gear train is oversized, and that allows you some adjustment. So I'll just slacken it off slightly. It means that the speed train can be moved inwards towards the centre of the shutter or outwards towards the case. Inwards gives you greater engagement with the main cam, which will slow the shutter down, and moving it outwards would give it lesser engagement with the cam at this point, which would speed the shutter up. Now we know we've got quite a good spring in there, so that can be most of the way towards the centre. I'll nip that spring up, nip that screw up rather, and that's cocked at the moment. If we release the shutter it should run down. That was alright. I wouldn't say that was as smooth as I'd particularly like. Let's have another listen to that. Speed train problem. See how that lever's sitting out there? It should have fallen back into the centre. Now the pin on this is bent where someone's adjusted the speed, and that may have some action there. It's probably when they bent that up, they may have bent the arm underneath it. See how that wants to stick? That should not stick. I'm going to straighten that pin up. I've got a little tool to do that. This is a hollow punch from a watchmaker's staking set. And I want to use that to lever that pin back up as it should be. It should be sticking pretty much straight up and down. That speed train's still not moving correctly. What I'm looking for is friction between this pin and this edge of the body here, because it looks to be very close. That's not what's doing it. Alright, the speed train can come out. It's possible there's some distortion in the frame of this train that's causing that. Let's just see if slackening the screw at this end, which would tend to release any distortion, see if that makes a difference. Well, it certainly did. Okay, that tells me that the speed train is distorted, and when I tighten this screw up it's pulling down and it's binding on one of those shafts, I would say, because in its relaxed position you can see that that moved very freely, and if we were to fire the shutter in that position it'd probably run down very smoothly. Let's give it a go. Yes, so some distortion in the frame of this speed train. That can be very tricky to get rid of. It's very hard to see where it is, but basically it means that when that's screwed down, pulled down tight, something is causing friction. It may be that this is pushed down in the centre here slightly, so it's squeezing on one of those shafts, and when we pull this down, that does it. Or it might mean that the underside of this is bent in some way. If I take it out, typically you can't see what's wrong. You can tell there's something wrong. You can get an idea of what might be wrong by the way it behaves, but sometimes it's very hard to see what's wrong. There's not a visible problem that you can see. That screw's reluctant, isn't it? What I'm looking for is some indication that there's it's twisted or otherwise out of shape. I'm really not seeing it. That screw's not loose. See, when it's not tied down anywhere, when it's not fixed between this point and that point and screwed down to the base plate, that moves beautifully freely. But as soon as that screw's tightened up, this must be flexing and causing problems. Oh, it's almost one of those impossible missions problems, this one. I'm just going to hold it up against this roll using that as a straight edge and just see if that base plate looks distorted. When I've finished playing with it like this, it'll probably need cleaning again. I'm just checking to see if that base looks parallel. It does look flat, so I'm none the wiser at the moment. I'm just going to check the end shake on these shafts. That's the amount of freeboard they've got this way. There's very little in any of them. Okay. Okay. Let's just try that again. Well, that spring's popped off its purchase. Let's put that back where that belongs. Yeah. I'm going to try that back in the shutter and see how it goes. I leant on something. Well, I think that was it. It's screwed down tight at both ends. If we release the shutter, it runs down smoothly. So what did I do? Well, I decided that there was insufficient end shake, that the plate here was pulled down too hard on those shafts, and that was preventing those little wheels from revolving smoothly. And what I did to relieve it was I bent up that plate very slightly. And of course this is all brass and it's quite thin and it easily goes out of shape. And that was enough to provide sufficient end shake on those gears that now it just runs smoothly. And I'm just going to adjust the speed on here because that's obviously running fast. So I'm going to move the speed train in towards the centre for maximum engagement with the main cam, which is there. And this should set something like the 1 second speed. It certainly wasn't slow. That's running quite well. Alright. I'm fairly happy with the state of that. What about the self-timer? Let's pop that into the shutter. Bring this setting lever around until the pin lines up with the hole in that arm. Yes, it's just a little bit, just run that down a bit. Here we go. Single screw holds this in place. There's a screw on the underside of this, drops into a little hole on the mechanism plate. That's what locates this end. Okay, so if we've set the self timer, cock the shutter. If we release it, does it immediately start the self timer? No, let's have a look. No, it's not blocked in its action there. Oh, okay. That's because we didn't have the internal cocking ring on with its spring that would pull that across. I haven't cleaned those parts yet. I think that self-timer is going to work. It certainly ran down nicely when I activated it manually at that point. Right, let me clean up the remaining components, which is this, the speed settings cam plate, and the retaining ring that holds it all in place. And I'm just looking to see if I have the tiny spring that holds that locking ring in place for later, and I still do. And that's a bonus because they're very easily lost. I've lost more than my fair share. Okay, I'll clean these bits and I'll just do it with some naphtha and a cotton bud and we'll put them back on the shutter. There's nothing for you to see here. I've got those other components cleaned up. Now there's just one last wipe in here to remove fingerprints from me mucking around with those speed trains. Must remove all the evidence. Right, so this internal cocking ring needs to go in. Now I'm going to take some molybdenum paste, I wipe around the inside surface where it runs round that lens tube, around the outside surface just a little wipe. The spring on this, I'll zoom you in a bit so you can see what I'm hooking it up to. This little lever here, there's a little post on there, it's got a little groove around the top which holds that spring. Pull the spring round and drops in there. You can see that it's trapped behind the arm here, that's where it would be in its cocked position. A bit of dust in here, I'll blow that out. this little shaft here, that's the cocking shaft that comes through from the camera body. I'll give the shaft of that a very brief wipe with molybdenum paste. Now the timing of the gear. This is most important. Get this in place. Oh, of course that shaft sticks out the back, so it's not wanting to drop into position. Okay, so the timing of the gear is such this seated correctly. That's better. Okay, so the first tooth on this gear drops into the first root of the tooth there. Our self-timer is activated by this little lump on this piece, this raised cam on this lever. So that thing needs to be sitting behind there like that in its rest position. This piece, I'll swing that around till its spring's engaged correctly. Flip it over the right way up. This piece. You can see how, you can possibly see how that spring is hooked round there at that point. This sits on here like this. The tail of that spring below here has to sit on this side of that post. So I've got to hold that back with the tip of my tweezers while I revolve this and drop it down into position. That leaves this piece sprung loaded. Right, and at that stage, that cocking shaft dropped back out because it sticks out the back of the shutter and I hit it. Okay, the shutter release is the same thing. It sticks out the back of the case and catches on stuff. Yeah, very easy to knock things out of line with this one. Okay, so that's all looking good. The speed settings cam plate. Whoops, I don't want anything like that. So I'm going to take some molybdenum paste and I'll give a wipe around the middle, a wipe over all of those little cam surfaces there, a wipe in there, and that's usually all I do. And fit this in place. Now our speed retard gear train, the pin on it there comes up into this section. You can check that you can move that. The B lever is sitting here, so when we're round at the B position, that's allowed to drop down and engage. And I'm not putting the front on yet, but we can put the retaining ring on here, which I have cleaned with acetone quite carefully. It's still tight on those threads. This was the one that gave us a fight taking it off. It'll do for the moment. I think I'm going to swap that out. I don't like that. So we need to cock the shutter and then release it. I've got a little tool for cocking that shutter. I better find it. This is the one I was looking for. So it's cocked here. Let me just rotate that clockwise. That's cocked now. It's ready to release. If I set my speed cam round to there, that would be the 1 second position. There on that hump, that would be the half second, quarter second, eighth of a second. Let's see what it's like. The eighth of a second is usually the tell. If it runs right on the eighth, everything else will fall into line. Usually. So I'm just going to rotate my shutter release with this pin. That didn't sound 100 miles away from correct. We'll cock it again, set the self timer. Set it to, an eighth will do, I suppose. And release it. You can hear the self timer running down. And there's the shutter released. So that's all moving smoothly. Our only problem here is this front retaining ring, which is far too stiff. And I don't know why. It may be distorted. There's something not quite right here. It may have been cross-threaded at some time. I'll find another one. Well, I searched through my parts boxes and the first retaining ring I came across was no better than the one I just had on there. But I got another one and that was screwed on, absolutely no problems at all. So it was a problem with the retaining ring, not with the lens tube, which I was beginning to suspect. Let's cock this shutter again. We'll set the speed to 1 second. We'll set the self timer and we'll release the shutter. That's running down smoothly. And there's the shutter opening and closing. I think that shutter works correctly. I've got to check my speeds on my shutter tester, but I'm pretty confident that one's going to be okay. So I'll check that, assuming everything is good. We'll put this back in its case and put it aside because I haven't serviced the camera yet. Well, that speed was running too slow by a comfortable margin. So I need to move my retard gear train. So first I'll cock the shutter. Get that off. Take this off so I've got access to that screw. Slacken this screw off slightly. Move my retard gear train out slightly towards the outside of the case. It's very subtle adjustments, these. Whoops, that's quite a long way. But I'll try it there. Get this back together, all correctly timed. Put my retaining ring back on the front. The replacement one that actually fits and runs on smoothly. Look at that. No problem at all. And I'll check that one. That all appears to work nicely. So I'm just going to clean the front plates here Now this piece here gives us our detents for our shutter speed settings. That's graphite grease that's in there. Of course it's very old graphite grease. I'm just going to clean that away, and I'll give that a wipe of molybdenum paste, because that's what I've got here and that'll do the job nicely. The shutter speed settings ring here. Excuse me. It shows a little bit of spot of corrosion here. That's purely cosmetic, it won't affect the way the shutter works, of course. That's just the way life is. Right, so let's see how this goes. So we have a retaining ring that works nicely, unlike the original retaining ring. The shutter speed settings ring goes on here. Now there are two notches in this, here and here. They line up with this tab and this tab. So get that seated on there. Now this tab here, that gives us our click stops. That lines up with these notches in this plate here. Now those notches in the plate there, I'm just going to give them a wipe of molybdenum paste. Just like that. This has got a little hole in it which lines up with this post, so it only goes in one position. Now did you hear that click into place then? That was the correct position. Our retaining ring screws on the front of the shutter, and it should go on without a fight. Yeah, just like that. Now the position of the retaining ring, how far do you tighten it down? Well, the click stop should be positive. You can hear them clicking. If you overdo it, you find that the setting is quite stiff. That's more tighter than it needs to be there. So I'll back that off to the next available hole, which is there. Check the action again. Still feels a bit stiff to me, so I'll back it up another bit of a turn until one of these holes is aligned with the notches there. That feels nice. There's a positive click stop, but it's not overly stiff in its action. Now we've got our tiny retaining screw for that locks our retaining ring. That drops in there. Those screws are very, very easily lost. They're unusual because not only are they a fairly small diameter screw, they're only a couple of threads in depth, so they're not easy to get started. They're even worse. Here, they don't tend to start easily. Let's see if I can get this lined up. My screwdriver unfortunately appears to be a bit magnetic at the moment. Yeah, that's it. It's lined up. It's screwed in. So you only get about a turn and a half, if that. Okay, so there's our shutter. That's all good. The aperture setting lever works nicely. And we can just about put this back in its case. Now I'm just seeing which pieces I need to do first, if any. The centre group, I'm just seeing whether that needs to go in immediately. No, apparently not. So we can assemble the rest of the shutter, which was this dress ring. And which way up did that go? That's our shutter release, that's our cocking shaft. The cocking shaft is at the top. Our dress ring here. Just drop that stray screw out of it. Make sure these two screws are done up. They are. I'll give this a wipe with some naphtha. Well, you can't see any of that, sorry. I'll give this a wipe with some naphtha, find the 3 screws and put this in place. And here really I'm doing is making sure I'm picking up any dirt and grime, dust, wiping away terrible fingerprints. Okay, so I decided that that was the top of the shutter. This is the top of the name ring, so it must go in that position. Where's their screw holes? Yeah, there. The screws are small and shallow, not very long. And the other two, which I've got to stretch out and find. One more. Okay, I'll just blow the dust out of that. There's a speck of something sitting on the blade there. What's that? I had those blades very clean. I don't want to see anything on them. Right, well that shutter is ready to have its lens set put back in place. So we've got the middle element, the rear element, and then the front element screws into the middle element. Let's put the shutter to one side. In fact, I've got a plastic bag here that I can stick that in. Is that the one? No, that's too small. I'll just put that in a plastic bag out of the way while I clean the lens. That'll keep that dust free while I do the lenses.